Hi, I'm David McCarthy of Heritage Housing Inc. and I'm here with Myles Brown of Amenta Architects and Ryan Sullivan of AP Construction. And we're here at Canaan Parish in New Canaan, Connecticut to talk about how Canaan Parish came to be. Okay, now we're standing here in the courtyard between the two buildings, and this looks a lot different from what the original site looked like.
It was a really challenging site to work with. Existing buildings, which were a challenge for the residents because they had to go up and down lots of stairs. There was a lot of safety concerns, especially since it was a community that was developed and a lot of people aged in place, a lot of elderly folks that lived here. So we looked at three schemes. Original's first scheme was an all townhouse scheme. Of course, we couldn't get the number of units on the site with low-rise structures without having just basically buildings and parking. We looked at a second scheme that had more like half apartment-style buildings and half townhouse-style buildings, and that was working a little bit better, but still really couldn't get the amount of green space that we wanted. So the final scheme that we looked at was all apartment-style buildings.
And what was the green space like in the prior development?
A lot of topography, a lot of hills, not really usable, a lot of rocks sticking out of the ground. So the outdoor space was, again, really important to the residents, and we worked very closely with landscape architect Wesley Stout here in New Canaan to come up with a program for the space that really can work for the residents. So some of the features that you see behind me is a basketball court. There's actually going to be a playground installed in the future right down below here, fenced in, very safe for the children. And this end of the site actually looks over, I don't know if we can see it today, but there's a pond in the woods below. We wanted to make sure we opened up the space for that view, which actually in the summertime will bring in the southwesterly breezes through the space, which will give a little bit of passive cooling to the environment. And then on the inside of the courtyard, we really created a circular walkway that connects the resident porches. And it's really, we think of this as the town green, if you will. Place for folks to play and just sit around and be out in the outdoors. There's a little seating area with string lights that can be kind of, again, for folks at night to sit outside and maybe have a meal together, and another sitting area up on the top. And you can see how the topography is actually kind of gently rolls down the hill. This was conceived by a landscape architect to be a sledding hill for play in the wintertime.
All right, so we're here in the community room, and this is a space that didn't exist in the whole property.
Yeah, that's right, David. And I think one of the first things we did was locate the space really near the main entry, where visitors, when they come into the property, they can see it more readily. And actually, the space lent itself to having a lot of natural light. It's at the end of the building. We've got windows on three sides, and the way the lay of the land works, the site actually slopes down to this area. You're able to get really high ceilings. And I think it becomes a really great space for the community. Residents come together here to have social events, birthday parties, things like that.
Talk about tenant relocation for a minute. There were 60 apartments here, as you said, and almost all of them were occupied when we started the design. How did that impact the site layout choices?
Yeah, David, it's a great comment, question actually, and it really influenced the design dramatically. The building that you see here actually is a 60-unit apartment building, and it was positioned probably in the only place on the site where there weren't structures.
And how would the relocation have worked on other site layouts that you looked at?
Yeah, in fact, the other schemes with full townhouse, we would have had to relocate all of the residents.
From the owner perspective, we realized very quickly that relocating 60 families off of this site into other rental housing in New Canaan was going to be very difficult, if not impossible. There just isn't very much rental housing in New Canaan. And so once we ruled that out, it sort of dictated the design. All right, so now we're gonna turn this over to Ryan, because Ryan, you were the one who really had to figure out how to build this structure with the existing buildings. You want to maybe show us where this structure ended and where the existing houses were?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, there were 10 buildings on the site to begin with. 8 of them stayed, which meant that 48 tenants were able to stay on site during the entire construction process.
All right, so again, the fence line from phase 1 to phase 2 was right along this sidewalk here. So while we were building phase 1 and trying to bring the grade up on this side, there was a difference that started at 12 feet and tapered around to the corner of the building that we're going to be walking towards. The tenant parking was actually along the fence line at the lower aspect of it here. There were 2 lanes for drive paths, and there were still, again, the 48 tenants coming through here. So we had to make sure that there was access continuously throughout to the buildings that were at the far corner near the basketball court, and they could get out through the main entrance. So with the grade difference here, it became a challenge for us to actually even complete some of the elevation work on our side. So we had boom lifts that were utilizing some of the space in the parking. Once building 1 was done, we turned it over to building 2. And we had all this space to work, but yet we had to start doing the blasting, which was basically the big mound of building 2 is essentially built within the rock there. So we blasted about probably 18,000 cubic yards of rock. Once the blasting was complete, the structure started to go up, and we had to begin filling up this entire central terrace with material, get the blast of the utilities through. And that was actually relatively easy, considering some of the other areas of the building that we had to deal with during phase 1.
One thing, Ryan, I thought we should talk about was moving the transformer. You had an existing transformer right in the middle of the temporary driveway that we were using during construction.
Right.
And you had to move it to put the new utilities in. How did that work?
That was a big component of trying to get into phase 1 there. So in that back lot, through where the transformer was at the time, there were 3 existing buildings that were going to be maintained throughout the entire duration of phase 1. So before the transformer was moved, we ended up, one of the foundation corners of building 1 went so far into the parking lot, we had to cut off access in order to maintain schedule. But in addition, we had to get a golf cart, which was kind of comical to a certain extent. But we transported some of the tenants that were handicapped. I think there were a couple people in the back area across that. There was a smaller temporary sidewalk that we were able to get through there next to the transformer before it was relocated. So we utilized that during business hours, and we were able to make it work.
All right, well, today is a blustery April day, so we've decided to come in and enjoy the nice warm community room for a few minutes. But I wanted to thank you, Myles, and thank you, Ryan, for joining me today, but also, much more importantly, for all the work you put into this project.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's really a pleasure to work with you and work with you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Really happy the project came together well. Yeah, glad to see the residents enjoying it.
Yeah, same here.